East Asia Soft has brought a lot of different games to the Switch, from the 2D platformer Wife Quest to 3D fan service game 7 Pirates H. There's a lot of variety out there, especially on the bigger platforms. But when the most recent mainline game from the Xuan Yuan Sword series popped up, it was very different. Something you would expect more from the likes of Koei Tecmo. It's taken me quite a while to get through this game, but here we are. A hack-and-slash action-adventure set in an alternate version of ancient China. Here is my review of Xuan Yuan Sword 7 for the Nintendo Switch. In this game, you play as Taishi Zhao. As a child, his parents were killed, and ever since, he's been caring for his sick little sister, taking on jobs with nearby soldiers and militias to afford medicine. But when a group of monsters damages her body beyond normal repair, he must invoke his secret connection to the mystic and go on a journey with her spirit in order to repair that body. The story here is actually really good. The start seems a bit like a grounded tale, and then monsters and teleportation to Elysium animated bodies, and the further you go, the more interesting it gets as the game slowly gives you backstory for the world in the form of myths in these nice little 2D cutscenes. What I figured was just going to be soldier guy fight monsters go turned out to be a pretty well done story. And despite being the 7th entry of this series, it is standalone, so there's no need to play previous games, very few of which are available on handhelds. When it comes to gameplay, this is an action RPG with customization and upgrade elements thrown in. As you play, you'll explore a large 3D world, fighting enemies in hack-and-slash combat and using materials to craft items. Now, the Switch version isn't really altered from the others, but it does include the Outfit DLC, offering the more black and red themed costumes for the main cast. But let's get into how you play this game. By glance at the combat, it looks like a Musou game, but it's actually a plot-driven action RPG. You're constantly moving around a large 3D world, visiting settlements, doing side quests, and having plot threads weave around as you get to where the story is currently directing you. Picture something like a classic PS1 era JRPG in terms of what the plot has you doing and how your objectives get sidetracked, but in this sort of ancient China Musou-esque setting. I've also seen a lot of people ask around over the years if this is an open world game, and that's kind of hard to answer. It's a very large interconnected world. You're constantly moving in the same area with very minimal loading sequences outside of story scenes, and you got fast travel over the gigantic map. There's a lot here that's in the open world formula, but the game doesn't really have big open areas. It's all very limited to linear pathways that you're following, making it so that there isn't really much room for going anywhere outside of where you're currently going. It is a huge interconnected map with very few loading sequences, but not what you would typically consider to be open world. As for main progression, as you travel along these linear pathways, enemies will spawn that you have to fight. It's very hack and slash, with you having a light and heavy attack, dodging, blocking, and eventually different sorts of skills and abilities once you start enhancing yourself and start gathering party members that follow you around. But even then, it's more a matter of commands for assist abilities, as you can't outright control the other characters. There's a bit of more to combat as well. You can learn abilities as you go, but you also get stances in your swordplay to enhance things in different ways. Stances change elements of your attacks, having you focus on things like thrusting or bare hands. It's an interesting way to do a little bit more customization as you go along. Though it still boils down to your typical attack, dodge, wait for openings, repeat sort of thing. I wouldn't really call it a difficult system to master, but it can be fun in that hack and slash way, especially when you get to some of the more major boss fights that have you using PS2 and PS3 era QuickTime events to do little flashy finishers. The combat ties into crafting as well. You've got all these different crafting areas on the customization menu to be able to make better equipment, soul accessories, and upgrading the service itself by merging materials together. And you've got special abilities to create a little siphon zone to pull enemies into, harvesting their souls if you defeat them while the field is up. It's a fun little gravity feature to kind of help you with the whole, oh yeah, by the way, every enemy can drop special materials that you'll need to craft things. Though there's more to this game than just its combat. As you explore temples and dungeons, you do a fair amount of puzzle solving, like moving statues around to create proper images. And this is kind of a positive and negative at the same time. The puzzles are easy to figure out, but the mechanics for some of them are repetitive and a bit agonizing. Pushing statues especially is very slow and feels almost PS1 Resident Evil-esque with how long it takes to push the statues around. Thankfully, if you don't want to bother with it at all of the puzzles can be skipped. As we bring all of this stuff together in gameplay, the system is pretty nice. You can customize a fair bit with a character skill tree as well as being able to upgrade all of your little crafting shops, and there are a lot of side quests in each settlement you can choose to do or not to do. As I said earlier, this felt like a classic JRPG but with the ancient China setting and hack and slash gameplay. And just like those classic RPGs, you have a lot of content and length here. It should take you about 20 hours to get through this game, giving you a pretty nice little adventure. Now let's dive into presentation, as there's a reason it's so surprising this game even got a Nintendo Switch port in the first place. It was a beautiful and technically up there game on other platforms in 2020. As expected, this game was downgraded by a lot to get it running on the Switch, and even then, it's far from perfect. Visually, I think it looks okay. The environments look surprisingly good, especially with the game still having a lot of foliage and moving grass that sways in the wind. Though the characters and enemies are very jaggy. They look okay in gameplay, though you can definitely tell this is one of those super low-res hair games when you get to cinematic scenes. Then we get to performance. The frame rate tries to stick to 30 FPS, but it doesn't. It's smooth-ish around the high 20s and low 30s, but drops frames quite a bit. It hiccups when moving around the environments, especially when turning the camera, and it will run very unstable when you first boot up the game, I'd say for about the first 2 to 3 minutes of gameplay. After that, it'll stabilize and still have drops into the 20s, but not nearly as severe. Though it is worth noting that handheld mode is worse on performance. It's still playable, but expect more severe frame drops when playing on the go. Though, to be honest, with this being East Asia Soft and with it being this game, I find this fairly acceptable. After all, I can't even get the demo of this game to run at a stable 30 FPS on the Steam Deck. Even the tutorial, walk out of a small house to a small yard segment, tanks into the 20s constantly. Now let's get into battery life. Sword 7 will give the original and light models a battery range of about 2.5 to 3 hours, while the V2 and OLED models get 5 to 6 hours. In conclusion, Sword 7 brings the hack and slash gameplay and openish design to the handheld world in playable form. Now the downside, the puzzles can get a bit too repetitive and dated, and there are plenty of performance hiccups that happen constantly, especially in handheld mode. If you're okay with the FPS in the 20s fairly often, it is playable and a very good RPG, just not the most optimized game on the Switch. Reviews to Go rates Xuan Yuan Sword 7 for the Nintendo Switch a 7 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.